January 9th, 2009, started out as a normal day for Robert and Janice Chae. Around 5 a.m., they were preparing to leave for work. The couple owned Penn Station Beauty Supply, a beauty supply store located in Suburban Station, a major train station in central Philadelphia. The business was very successful, which had allowed them to buy their 4-bedroom home in the town of North Wales, in Montgomery County, north of Philadelphia. They drove into the city each day to operate their business. They did not get to leave as was their routine on this day, however. Janice was in their garage, putting on her shoes, and Robert was in their driveway, on his way to warm up his vehicle, when they were ambushed by 3 armed men. The attackers dragged Robert into the garage as he asked why they were doing this, and tried to fight them off. The 3 men then began beating him and binding him with duct tape and flex ties. Janice was then forced inside the home by 2 of the unknown men. She was taken upstairs, where the attackers forced her to help them get into the safe in her bedroom. They stole between $15,000 and $20,000 in cash, some gold jewelry, a passbook for a Korean bank account, and a family symbol stamp. The Chae's 2 adult children also lived in the house, but had been asleep when the attack started. 23-year-old Mina awoke to the sound of her mother hyperventilating in the hallway and got up to check on her. One of the attackers put a gun to her head and demanded access to the safe, as her mother had not yet provided it. When Mina said she did not know how to open the safe, she was taken to the garage and forced to kneel on the floor next to her severely injured father. 29-year-old Richard was awoken by the attackers coming into his bedroom and shining flashlights in his face. They pistol-whipped him, and he fell to the floor before being dragged from the room. Janice, Mina, and Richard were all taken to the basement and bound with duct tape. One of the attackers stayed in the basement to guard them, but he then went upstairs. As soon as she and her children were alone, Janice was able to free herself enough from the duct tape to run out of the house through a door in the basement. She ran to a neighbor's house to call 911. When the attackers realized that Janice escaped and had most likely gone for help, they immediately fled. Richard was able to free himself and his sister and ran upstairs to lock the door to prevent the men from coming back inside the home. Richard and Mina then went to their father in the garage. Duct tape had been used to bind his feet together and his arms behind his back. Robert's head was also almost completely covered with duct tape. By the time police arrived on the scene, Robert was dead. He was 58 years old. His autopsy found that he had died as the result of asphyxia. The duct tape covering his head restricted his airway, and due to the severe beating he was subjected to, he bled extensively, and his blood went into his airway. Robert was born Jimchik Chae in a small village in Korea in 1950. He grew up very poor and was only able to leave his village by joining the military. When he first came to the United States, he had only a few $100s with him and no English language skills. Despite these circumstances, he got married, had a family, and started his successful business. When he became a naturalized U.S. citizen, he changed his first name to the more American-sounding Robert. There had been a string of home invasion robberies targeting Asian business owners in Philadelphia, so the possibility that Robert's murder had been connected to these crimes was considered. However, the victim profile appeared to be the only thing in common between the attack on the Chae family and the other robberies. In those crimes, the victim was accosted by armed perpetrators who quickly took money and valuables and left. None of these other robbery victims or their families were restrained or assaulted. Furthermore, the perpetrators in these crimes wore ski masks to prevent their victims from being able to identify them. The fact that the individuals who attacked the Chae family and killed Robert had not worn masks raised concerns that they had not been worried about the Chaes being able to later identify them. They may not have worn masks because they planned to kill all the members of the family to eliminate any witnesses, a plan that was ruined by Janice Chae's escape. Richard Chae had poor eyesight and relied on glasses to see clearly. Since he obviously did not sleep with them on, he could not clearly see the individuals who pulled him from his bed and forced him into the basement. Mina and Janice Chae, however, were able to provide detailed descriptions of 2 of the men who had invaded their home. They worked with a sketch artist to develop composite images of the men, which were then released to the local media. Because Janice and Mina could potentially identify the men who attacked them and killed Robert, police feared that the men may return to kill them to prevent them from ever making such an identification. The Chaes did not feel safe in their home because they shared such fears, and found it difficult to be in the place where they had been attacked and Robert had been murdered. They therefore went to stay with family, and police kept them under surveillance there for their safety. While only 3 men had forced their way into the Chae home, more people may have been involved. According to the surviving members of the Chae family, the 3 attackers inside the home had been talking on cell phones. The conversations the Chaes overheard indicated that the people on the other end of the line were also involved in the crime. Cell phone data would prove to be critical to the investigation. Police obtained a subpoena which allowed them to access the records of the cell phone tower located closest to the Chae home in order to see what calls were being made in the area at the time of the home invasion. They were able to identify at least 3 phones that had been in contact with each other in the area at the time in question. Unfortunately, they were all prepaid cell phones, meaning there was no account owner on record for any of them. However, investigators were able to identify other numbers each of these phones had been calling. In analyzing these records, they came across calls made to someone close to the case, Angelo Shin. Shin was the nephew of Robert Chae. While he was in high school, Shin had lived with the Chaes for a year and a half, while his parents had been in Korea, meaning he was familiar with the layout of the Chae house and aware of the location of their safe. Robert and Janice treated Shin as though he were their own son, and their son Richard considered Shin to be a brother. Shin had a minor criminal record, 1 drug arrest, and would later be labeled by prosecutors as a wannabe gangster. Police were surprised that a member of the Chae's own family could have been involved in the attack on them that resulted in Robert's death. The possibility was also concerning because it meant the surviving members of the family were potentially in serious danger. They had been staying with Shin and his family since the murder, meaning he had easy access to them should he and his accomplices decide to kill them to prevent them from identifying the men who had invaded their home and killed Robert. Therefore, once Shin was identified as a potential suspect, police quickly tried to get the Chae family away from him. When they contacted Mina and Richard Chae to ask if they knew where their cousin was, they were with him. Investigators asked them to come with their cousin to the police station so that they could all be asked some more routine questions. When the 3 of them arrived there, Shin was placed in one room and Mina and Richard in another. While Shin was questioned by police, Richard and Mina were informed that their cousin may have been involved in the attack that had resulted in their father's murder. The news was devastating. At this time, police did not have enough evidence to charge Shin with murder or any charges related to the robbery, but they were afraid for the Chae's safety should he be released. In his statement to police, Shin had claimed that he had never been in contact with anyone involved in the crime. Using the cell phone records that showed him communicating with the cell phones used in the area at the time of the murder, they were able to arrest him on a charge of providing false information to police and hold him. After just a day in jail, Shin changed his story and admitted to his involvement in the home invasion. He told police that he had been bragging about his rich uncle to his friend Joseph Page, a 23-year-old from Philadelphia. Shin told Page that his uncle kept over $100,000 in the safe in his home. Page had a history of committing home invasion robberies and decided that Shin's uncle sounded like an ideal target. He recruited 5 more people to execute the robbery, 2 who would enter the house with him, and 3 who would later be referred to as the cleanup crew, who acted as lookouts and getaway drivers. Shin worked with Page for over a month to orchestrate the robbery. He also attended a meeting to plan the home invasion, where he provided everyone involved with information about his aunt and uncle's daily routine and the location of their safe. He claimed to police that his family was supposed to be left unharmed. It is unclear how he could honestly have been so confident in his relatives' safety, given the fact that he saw the duct tape, knives, and guns the others had collected to use during the crime at this meeting. Shin told police that he had learned of his uncle's murder when Page called him, upset about the much smaller amount of money in the safe than he had been promised. Page allegedly told Shin that Robert had died because they needed to hurt him a little after he tried to resist during the attack. Because so many people had been involved in the crime, each perpetrator received a relatively small amount of money for their participation. Angelo Shin betrayed his family and got his uncle killed for just $2,000. On February 4th, 2009, Shin and the other 6 alleged participants in the home invasion were charged with the crime. Shin was charged with third-degree murder, and the others, 5 of whom had been present at the scene, were all charged with both second and third-degree murder. Page, 25-year-old Amitadi Latham, and 18-year-old Kari Pitts were identified as the 3 men who entered the house. Julius Wise, 32, Robert Eatman, 33, and Sybil White, 17, all of Philadelphia, were all charged as members of the so-called cleanup crew. Unfortunately, what this investigation has revealed is far more sinister than a simple robbery. Angelo Shin is a traitor of the worst kind. He's a traitor to his family. He's a traitor to his people, and his treachery is of the lowest kind we've ever seen here. Montgomery County District Attorney Risa Vetri Furman stated when the charges were publicly announced. Page and Latham were tied to the crime by the cell phone data. After they were arrested, they were obligated to provide samples of their DNA, which also tied them both to the scene. Page's DNA was found on the inside of a portion of a finger from a black latex glove, consistent with the type the chaes said their attackers wore, found near Robert's body, and Latham's DNA was found on some of the duct tape used to restrain the chaes. Investigators believe it got there when he used his teeth to rip the tape. White, who had been the getaway driver, pled guilty to third-degree murder. At her sentencing hearing, she took full responsibility for her participation in the crime, but also said she had been convinced to participate because she was foolish, stupid, naive, and gullible. She was sentenced to 4 to 8 years in prison, plus 20 years of probation. Eatman also pled guilty to third-degree murder and apologized in court. He received 20 to 40 years in prison, plus 4.5 to 9 years for a robbery charge. Wise, who had participated in the planning of the home invasion and helped cover it up after the fact, pled guilty to third-degree murder the day after his trial for second-degree murder began. He was sentenced to 16 to 32 years in prison. Eatman and White were both witnesses for the prosecution when Page, Pitts, and Latham went to trial. Page and Latham were both found guilty of second-degree murder, robbery, burglary, and conspiracy. Page was given a consecutive 40 to 80-year prison term, over and above a life sentence. Latham was sentenced to life plus 32 to 64 years. Pitts, alleged to have been the third man to actually enter the chae home, was found not guilty at trial, as there was no cell phone or DNA evidence tying him to the crime, and Mina and Janice Chae had not gotten a good enough look at him to be able to identify him. Angelo Shin pled guilty to third-degree murder. In October of 2010, he was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison for his role in the robbery that cost his uncle his life. He later unsuccessfully appealed this sentence, arguing that it was too severe in light of his cooperation and the remorse he expressed. Robert's death, the trauma of the home invasion, and Angelo Shin's betrayal left the surviving members of the Chae family unable to live a normal life. Robert's son Richard has stated that he cannot comprehend how someone could betray their family in such a manner.